Please rise for the pledge from Mr. Ross, and followed by the invocation by Mr. Skinner.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear Lord, thank you for allowing us to gather. Give us the courage, the strength, the information, and the knowledge to make the right decisions for Spotsylvania County. Keep all Spotsylvanians safe and keep the military personnel safe who are in harm's way, and bless their own families. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Mr. Chairman, first order is to approve the agenda, and right now the only thing that is on the agenda is the work session with the CIP review and then the tax rate advertisement.
Mr. Skinner.
I'd like to amend the agenda tonight for public comment, especially since we're sitting the tax rate, the advertised tax rate. I believe it's important that the public does have something to say about it. So I'll make a motion that we add that to the agenda.
Any board members have a comment? I'll just make a comment. I don't necessarily agree with this. The reason we're getting ourselves into this is we keep on changing our own way of doing things. One year it's one way, next year's the next. Yeah, we change, and then we change back, then we are back again the following year. Usually work sessions do not have public comment. The public's already had 2 sessions where they could have commented on this, and they will continue to have two comment periods after this meeting. So, but we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Skinner to suspend the bylaws to allow public comment on this meeting.
It's just to add it to the agenda.
To add it to the agenda. I apologize. Sorry, Amy. We're adding it to the agenda. Mr. Skinner?
I'm Mr. Yakubowski.
That's about the 4th time I've done that. I'm sorry. I apologize, Mr. Yakubowski.
No, that's okay. I just had a question. I had a thought that we had public comment at every meeting that we have, and when I saw that it wasn't on there, I'm just...
The bylaws just address your regular meetings, and the bylaws are silent as far as the public comment at a work session. It is in your bylaws to have public comment at your first and second regular meetings.
Okay, so anything other than the first and second meeting, it doesn't address it? Okay, gotcha.
It doesn't address it. The bylaws are silent on it. I mean, it's certainly within the board's prerogative to set to include in the agenda whatever they wish.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, we'll do a voice vote again. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Chair, aye.
Okay, so we will go to the public comment period now. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
I guess we added it. Did we
Yeah.
approve the other? Did we vote to approve?
Okay, you need to go ahead and approve the agenda then.
All right.
Motion to approve agenda as amended.
Motion to approve the agenda as amended by Mr. Skinner. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Chair's aye.
Okay, all right, we'll go to public comment. Since there was not a sign-up list, anyone who wishes to comment is free to step up to the podium and do so. Public presentations are an opportunity for you to present matters you believe deserve the board's attention. Those presentations are not part of a public hearing. Public presentations are a one-way comment from you to the Board of Supervisors. They are not a forum for dialogue or debate. To make a presentation tonight, you can just step up and come to the lectern and state your name, address, and voting district. What's that?
Address or voting.
Or voting district. Address your comments directly to the board. If you are speaking on your own behalf, you will have 3 minutes to speak. If you are representing a group, you will have 5 minutes to speak. Public presentations shall not be used to address matters subject to public hearings or to make political campaign speeches, private advertisements, or personal attacks. Written comments to the board are always welcome. Does anyone desire to come and speak to the board at this time?
Hi, gentlemen. I just want to make sure you understood the email I sent you earlier and the new table.
Could you give your name, please?
I always forget that. I don't know why. Sorry. Dawn Napper, Lee Hill District. But there was a miscommunication last week. What I stated was 79% of school employees are below the midpoint. And the table you have in front of you, if you look on the back, I did highlight midpoint, 79%, and that's about 2,400 school employees are indeed below the midpoint. And since you are bringing your employees up to the midpoint, the schools should be funded enough to bring their also employees up to the midpoint, which again is over 2,400 employees. So I just want to make sure that was corrected and you had the correct information before you made any decisions tonight, because I think you should have all the correct information before you decide on a tax rate. So that was all. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak?
My name is Michael Smith. I live at 9003 Chancery Court, Spotsylvania, Livingston District, and I serve as the chairman of the Budget Review Committee for the Fredericksburg, Virginia Patriots, and will be speaking on their behalf tonight. Thanks to Mark Taylor and the county fiscal staff for assembling this large puzzle we call the recommended FY 2019 budget for Spotsylvania County. This budget is a candidate for a Geico commercial. More for the schools, more for the county, more pay, more services, and more from taxpayers. I would not recommend it for prime time. County surpluses of $7 million for FY16 and $12 million for FY17 are a result of some cost savings, but also an improved economy leading to increased revenue. The property tax rate for FY17 was 85 cents and resulted in a $12 million surplus, which if you had adjusted it, would have been a 76 tax rate, which would have paid everything for the county for FY17. That's 76 cents. The schools had an FY17 surplus of $1.3 million and spent it when they could have returned it back to the county and asked for it to be added to critical pay raises for teachers and other employees to include bus drivers, bus aides, and other below market average school employees. This would have added $1.3 million to the transfer of $2.5 million for almost $4 million and would have assisted in closing a revenue gap. Animal shelter or pet resort. What are we building in Manning? I love animals like everyone else, but this project is now a multi-million-dollar range. When will it end? Instead of a new social services building, can we look at existing buildings such as the Marshall Center, whose spaces remain mostly vacant and whose cost of operating and maintaining exceeds revenues generated? If this building was good enough for Spotsylvania County residents as a school, surely is good enough to provide health and welfare services to our residents. The county does not need a money pit. It is our hope that an improved economy will reduce the need for social services in our county. We don't need new schools right now, and you can't assume we will need new public buildings when a handful of private schools would easily absorb the projected increase in students. The increase in students this year is 222 over FY17. And if you divide that by the 30 schools, you end up with about 8 per school. I don't think that is a demand signal for new public school buildings at this time, but I do agree it is something we do have to keep an eye on in the future. We don't need to be paying for City of Fredericksburg roads or using county dollars when state or federal government funds are available. A federal infrastructure bill in partnership with the states could provide significant funding for major traffic improvements, and our county needs to be ready to take advantage of this if it happens in the future. I understand the need for increased fire and safety, but the EMS and Fire Safer grant ended this year, and that's adding $450,000 to the county budget. I know we need a lot of money in that area, and there's $23 million is projected to be spent for fire and rescue alone. Maybe perhaps a phased-in approach over 7 years to get where we need to go, or at least look at other areas of the budget and see if we can get there this year. Mr. Yakubowski criticized the FBP for agreeing with the 85% property tax rate last year, even though FBP knew it should be and could be lower. For FY18, we should be expecting a surplus equal to or greater to than the $12 million for FY17. We won't know until after July of this year. Unfortunately, the Board of Supervisors and county can't refund taxpayers the surplus, but they can make it right by lowering both the property tax and the personal property tax rates for FY19, and still having more than enough money for the schools in the county. President Trump and Congress delivered tax relief to the people, and we know our governor won't, but we hope that our Board of Supervisors will. Any tax rate above an 85-cent rate this year is an unwanted and unnecessary tax increase, because all the assessments are going up for 2018. Revenue is equalized at 0.816, and that'll basically lead to the taxpayers paying about the same amount of money for FY19 as they did last year. Also, Mr. Yakubowski, we're going to disappoint you again for this year. The FPP recognizes and celebrates the revenue increases and cost savings over the previous 2 years and respectfully requests an advertised tax rate of 82 cents. That's 0.82. That is a half a penny above the equalized rate recommended by the county administrator. Although an 82 rate provides all the money this county needs this year, it does not provide relief to our senior citizens, fixed income residents, hardworking middle class businesses, and homeowners. However, we do ask, if you find additional savings and budget cuts, we ask that
Your
it be
time is
applied.
up. Please wrap up.
Yes, sir. If you find additional cuts in the rate that you select, please apply it to the county personal property tax reduction or the reduction of debt for this county. The new commercial for this
Is there anybody else that did not, that has not spoken that wishes to do so at this time?
Owner and a 16-year highly qualified advanced degree holding county educator. And in the interest of transparency, the Secretary of the Spotsylvania Education Association, however, I am here speaking as a private citizen this evening. At tonight's meeting, you're going to vote to about the advertised tax rate. Once set by this board, the tax rate cannot be increased. In past years, I've come before this board encouraging you to set a rate that would allow citizens' input to matter. Historically, tax rates have been advertised that did not allow for a healthy community debate. This year, especially in light of recent events, both in and out of our community, and Mr. Taylor's budget presentation from last Tuesday, our community needs a chance to voice their concerns about the possibility of no county departments being fully funded. As an educator, I'm responsible for the safety and well-being of my 8- and 9-year-old third-grade students. We practice a variety of emergency drills to include lockdown intruder drills. Each time I barricade my classroom door and discuss what to do. What if this is not a drill? What if you're not in the classroom? I pray just a little bit harder. I hug my students a little bit tighter at the end of the day, and I say to myself, oh, Holy Mother of God, I hope that those emergency plans, if I have to find out if they really work, I hope those men in blue really come fast. Please bring everyone to help my kids. What if, however, there's just not enough? Not enough boots on the street, not enough equipment, not enough advanced life support units? What if the road construction still isn't finished? What if the traffic is overwhelming and snarled, or the barricade of my door just doesn't hold? Yes, the educator who many are quick to want to demoralize and humiliate this time of year is the same educator that would gladly stand up and protect every student in this county when that terrible, horrible day comes. So, gentlemen, I ask of you to think long and hard. Allow this county the opportunity to participate in the process. Our community depends and deserves all, and I mean all, county departments to be fully funded.
May I begin? Okay. Hi, my name is Megan Jackson. I live in the Lee Hill District. I am a first-timer here, so bear with me. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes to speak. I am a mother to the 4 most amazing children I've ever known. I am here tonight on their behalf. Not only for them, for all children who deserve a voice. The topic I wish to address is positive change for better securing our schools. Every single person in this room is aware of all the school shootings and threats, and it is a horrific reality that nobody should ever experience. However, so many are. When I received the county message on Sunday that a gun threat had been made to my child's school, it quickly became way too real. I have been given the most important gift and role in life, and that, in my opinion, is being a mother. I take this title very seriously and can no longer sit back, rely on others to put in the work it takes to make the difference. We cannot keep talking, delaying what changes need to be made. The time for action is now, and it was yesterday. Because every single child on this earth deserves to go to school and only worry about school. They should not be in fear for their lives, and I am certain that is one thing we can all agree on. So what can we do? I have quite a list, but I'd like to hit the key focal points tonight. 1, metal detectors. I know this is controversial and will take much more discussion than what is available tonight, but it is worthy of real talk. The pricing of metal detectors does vary, but they start as low as $1,000. With some research into different models and a look into the budget, this can absolutely be attainable. It would add extra time onto the school day, so we would need to find a way to make it work. Again, those are details that can be discussed further at another meeting with the allotted time necessary for such a debate. Some may argue that they are unsightly and create a prison-like feel, or that it's an invasion of privacy. Some may preach that it's a shame that we would need these in the schools. You know what I say to that? It is. It is a shame. But the simple fact is that times are changing, so we must change with them. Stand up or fall behind, and we are falling. And by falling, we are failing our children. 2, armed officers. We need them, whether it's a deputy, a K-9, or retired and cleared veterans. We need their protection, or at least have them there for proper checking at the metal detectors if all day can simply not be done. And in addition, any person working with or in the schools must be thoroughly background checked. 3, lock the doors and check IDs. We should already be doing this. I should not be able to walk into Thornburg Middle as I please. This is unacceptable. I should be walking into the school after an officer, preferably, has taken my ID, asked me what my business is there, unlocked the door, and checked any purse or bag I may have on my person. Again, metal detectors would make this easier and less uncomfortable. 4, the last point I want to hit, and probably the most important of all, is mental health. Mental health is overlooked, and it requires much more attention. So many lives could benefit from more counselors and social workers being present in the school system. From the time a child enters kindergarten, it should be mandatory to meet with a counselor at least 3 times per year. Once in the beginning, once in the middle, and once at the end of the year. 15 to 20 minutes of talk could go a long way. It will help counselors see what child may require more meetings or attention, or what families may need social workers to step in and take a closer look. As a student grows older and faces new challenges, they may be able to get the help they need because the people that are qualified to do so have been
Your time is up.
I'm just wrapping up.
Your time is up, please. Take your seat.
Ma'am, we're holding pretty tight to the time limits this year. No, ma'am. Thank you, though.
Does anyone else wish to speak?
Ron, I live in the Battlefield District, Kingswood Subdivision, and I am here for the SEA, Spotsylvania Education Association. I'm also here for myself. I am concerned about the way we have gone about setting our advertised tax rate. I would like to address some of the comments that Mr. Smith had made, and also the young lady that was just up here. Mr. Smith said, more money for the county, less for the taxpayers. Well, it's the taxpayers that benefits from all the services that the county provides. That includes fire, sheriff, public service, landfill, all of that is counted by county taxpayers, and they benefit from it, as well as from schools. The other thing that Mr. Smith had said was that although we are only getting a small increase in population at the schools, that is just the beginning. There is more to come, and we are definitely seeing an increase in special education population, and that's coming from within the population that we already have. We can't assume that all of that population is going into 30 schools, because we don't assume that they all come at the same different levels. He mentioned that the grant ran out for the fire department, so now you are going to have to cover that. But he then says in another breath that the schools should use one-time money to take care of the salaries for the teachers. Well, you can't do that. You're finding that out with the grant that's expired, and now you have to pay for those firefighters. We can't do the same thing with the schools, and that's been said many times. We cannot use one-time money for salaries. But that one-time money could go into some of the ideas that this young lady just said, because then that can be used for safety, because that's one-time spending. So I would encourage you to think about safety, because we know that is a priority now in our schools. Should have been all the time, but it becomes more highlighted every time we have a shooting. We should think about keeping the advertised tax rate as you have it right now, not asking for a tax increase, asking for you to keep it right where it's at right now and start there. Allow your constituents to speak to that tax rate. Don't lower it, advertise it lower, and then take away any reason for people to show up to talk about it. I would also like to see that he talked about the Marshall Center. Well, we want to make Spotsylvania County look good to people coming in. We have younger people moving into Spotsylvania County. And this is not to say that our older community doesn't deserve good, but people moving in want to see good, new stuff, and that includes buildings. And as much as we all love the Marshall Center for its history and for just being there, we want to see new buildings also. So I encourage you, please keep the advertised tax rate where it's at right now at 85 cents, and let us have a good discussion. Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else who has not spoken that wishes to do so now?
Good evening. My name is Peter Fotenhauer. I live on, Wakeman Drive in the Battlefield District, and I'm speaking tonight as an individual. Thank you for allowing public comment tonight. I know that, as was explained at a work session, that's not always the case, but people live very busy lives, and this year's budget calendar is especially compressed. The last week and a half has seen the school board adopt a proposed budget, the county administrator present a budget, the schools present their budget to you, and now a debate on the tax rate. I am grateful that you decided that, given that timeline, it was appropriate to allow some public comment. And I wanted to throw out a couple of ideas this evening and respond to one or two things I've heard tonight. First of all, we've had $19 million in surpluses over the last 2 years that are the results of what some might consider excessive austerity. If you underfund county services, fire, rescue, EMS, schools, and the economy is improving, of course you're going to run a surplus. Last year in particular, the school division was not fully funded, yet people were very happy that there was a $12 million surplus. I would have much rather some of that surplus been given to the schools up front, although I know you can't predict very accurately when there will be one. But we need to be thinking not about just saving money, although that's always important, but how equitably and fairly are we distributing that money? We are currently debating whether or not the schools will get enough funding to implement the Evergreen study, but the debate about implementing the Evergreen study for the county employees on your side of this artificial divide that comes out and attracts a lot of attention every year at budget time has already been settled and debated. We have class sizes with over 30 children in classes. I have 3 classes this year of 29 students or higher. I have a class of 17 that brings my overall average down, but as a teacher, I know which class is easier to teach, and I think I know which class parents would rather have their child in. We need more counselors. They were one of the first things cut 10 years ago. My school has 2 excellent guidance counselors who have over 350 students that they are responsible for dealing with every day. We were just scheduling 9th grade schedules today, and having one person trying to do all of those for the entire 8th grade is rough. And I agree we don't need any money pits, and that includes pools that are broken that belong to private schools that we are thinking about purchasing. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak? Chairman?
Not seeing it, we'll close public comment. Now we're at tax rate.
We have our finance director, Mary Sorrell, and our budget manager, Bonnie Jewell, to go over the CIP and then also discuss the advertised tax rate.
I'm going to start with just a couple slides on the advertised tax rate.
Okay.
May I have the floor? Thank you. The recommended budget that was presented last week is balanced at the equalized real estate tax rate of 81.64 cents and at a personal property tax rate that is reduced by 3 pennies, both for the general personal property tax as well as for the boat and boat trailer separate personal property tax. If the rates that currently existed for 2017 are shown here on the slide in the middle column, and then the recommended rates for 2018, which are included in the recommended budget, are shown on the right-hand side. And these are all the tax rates other than the special service district rates, which I'm going to show on the next slide. If you wish to give yourselves additional flexibility beyond the equalized rate with which to consider the $2 million schools request above the additional $3 million that's included in the recommended budget, or other requested items not included in the recommended budget, such as the staffing necessary for 24/7 advanced life support at companies 4 and 8, you may choose to advertise a higher rate. Ultimately, the rates adopted in April for 2018 may be lower than, but cannot be higher than, the advertised rates. For the service districts, again, the setup of the slide is the same. The 2017 rates that were adopted are in the middle column. Those recommended for 2018 are on the right-hand column. And I do think that this slide deserves some explanation, which I'm realizing that I neglected to put in the budget document itself. So bear with me as I explain what's happening here. Every year for each of the 4 service districts, we look at the debt service associated with the service district projects and make sure that the revenue to be brought in from the special taxes will be sufficient to pay that service district's debt service. Please be aware that as shown on this slide, the 2018 special tax rate for 3 of the 4 special service districts will need to increase to meet existing debt service requirements. And the changes are shown here, identified in red font where there is a change in the rate. Obviously, the largest increase here is Harrison Crossing. We have taken on additional debt for the widening of Harrison from Old Plank to Gordon within the Harrison Crossing service district. And the existing tax rate of 39 cents is not sufficient to cover the existing debt service, the previously issued debt, and to pay back the state revenue sharing allocated to the project as approved by the board in September 2015. As such, when we did the analysis to determine based on the current 2018 assessment of properties within that district, the tax rate necessary to pay the existing debt, and the payback of the state revenue sharing is 50 cents. Also, I need to note that the county administrator asked me to report in his absence tonight that for the county to fund the difference between the Spotsylvania and state average per pupil spending, as the school division calculates it in their presentation, we would need about 18 additional pennies on the tax rate to fund that. And with that, we will take any questions you have related to the tax rate or the budget before you vote on the tax rates to be advertised, and then we'll move on to a conversation about the CIP.
Any questions from the board for Mr. Ross?
So what, will you please repeat about the 18 cents? I was not clear on what that
Yes.
meant.
In the school board's presentation to you on Thursday evening, they had a slide number 38, that showed per pupil spending ranking. And the state average in fiscal year 2018 was $11,745 per pupil. Spotsylvania's was reported by the school board at $10,571 for a variance per pupil of $1,174. If you multiply that 1,174 by the 23,896 students expected for 2019, fiscal year 2019, divide that by the $1.4 million tax rate, per penny tax, and account for the additional $3 million that has already been factored into the recommended budget, you would be left with needing 18 additional pennies to fund what is being reported as the variance between the state average and Spotsylvania per pupil.
Okay, I do have another question.
Go ahead.
Okay, for the personal property other than boats and boats trailers that's taxed at 50% value, if you could pull that slide up. I think there's a lot of confusion, not only among, sometimes, this has been an ongoing issue, but as far as what our actual tax rate is. And I don't know, Debbie Williams isn't here tonight, is she? No one's here. So what if we were to tax at 100% of the value and half the tax rate? Is there any downside in doing that?
If I remember that conversation from previous years, and we have talked about it in a number of different budget cycles, and Carl, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember the response being that that was the purview of the Commissioner of Revenue as to whether that was taxed at a rate other than 100% or at 100%.
So if we were to set the tax rate tonight at whatever, and it's taxed at 50% value after tonight, can we change that after talking to the Commissioner of Revenue?
Bonnie, I believe it's set forth in the county code, is it not, about taxing at what level of value? I don't know that it's up to the commissioner as to what the level of tax. I think that's set forth in the code, but I'm not.
I believe it is, but I believe as Bonnie said, the historical information that we've found about it, that it is up to her, it is up to the Commission of Revenue to make that determination in the state code. I think the state code says it's her determination.
Well, what?
And mathematically, we could make that change.
Right.
I mean, obviously, but there were reasons, and I apologize, I don't recall, but there were specific reasons why the commissioner chose to do it at 50%. As far as the state code requirements, we're required to advertise the tax rate. As far as changing the actual calculation into the analysis, I don't know. If we advertise the rate at this 50% and then we turn around and change it later, it would definitely be a lower rate at 100%. So we wouldn't have an issue with the tax rate. I'm just not sure about the calculation.
Yeah, I'm not sure at this time either. I'd have to check on that.
I think I remember it being that if you had a car that's assessed at $10,000 and it had, say you had a big dent in it and you didn't repair the car, so it'd actually be less than $10,000, but then she can go back and say, well, I'm only taxing you at $5,000. But I guess the other question I would have, let's say we set that tax rate, can she then go ahead and make it 100% at that tax rate after it's passed, or she can't do that, can she?
I don't believe she could. And I will just say too, it's my recollection, because I think the budget staff did some analysis comparing us to other localities. There are a variety
I
of
know.
ways.
I wish there wasn't.
Yeah, there's
because
no
it doesn't-
consistency.
There's
I
no
mean, some-
consistency, so you can't
I think
compare one
Stafford does it
county
on
to another.
40% of the value or something, so there are
Right.
very odd, from a comparison purpose, it is hard to compare from
It's
one
very hard
locality
to
to the other,
compare,
yes.
and that's what I'm shooting for. Okay, so it sounds like we could come down from the advertised, obviously, and would need to talk to Debbie.
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from the board? I believe we're at tax rate.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, just to comment on that, I mean, you can advertise these rates, and when we can have a discussion with the Commissioner of Revenue regarding the percentage, and you could always, if that percentage is increased, you can always lower the rate when you adopt the rate. You just can't exceed what was advertised.
All right, puts us again at tax rate. I'm willing to make a motion, if you don't mind. I'd be willing to go ahead and make a motion for 85 cents.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Dr.
does your motion include any of the other tax rate or just real estate?
Just real estate. Any comment? Mr. Yakubowski?
Thank you. I was going to say that I would like to see the advertised rate at 85 and the other advertised rates at their current rate of fiscal year 18 that we're currently in. So to keep them on the first page of the flyer here, just to keep everything the same on the left side. But if we need to do that all together, that's fine. If not, if we're just doing real estate, we just do real estate. That's.
I think we have a motion on the floor that is just for the real estate at 85.
Just real estate.
If you want to make a motion to substitute to make it 85 plus that, you can certainly do that, and the board would then vote on your substitution before going back to Mr. Benton's motion. So is that a substitute motion, or do you just want to wait until after this is voted on to go to the other ones?
The second part of what you said. We can just wait.
So we'll
That's
wait.
fine.
All right.
All right. Mr.
Carl,
Marshall?
did he make a friendly amendment to add that?
No, we just changed the bylaws to kind of explain or do away with what the friendly amendment is. It's a substitute motion, so it's not something that an individual member gets to accept or reject. The board actually votes on substituting that motion or not.
Gotcha.
All right, so the motion is by me for the 85 cents real estate tax only. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
No.
Mr. Ross?
Nay.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
No.
Chair's aye. Now, it should pass.
Yeah, now we need the other tax rates to be advertised.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to keep the other tax rates according to the slide here at the 2017 rate, calendar rate, as is, for advertising purposes only.
All right, any comments?
May I just clarify that this is applicable to slide number 2 and does not apply to the service district rates?
I think he's talking about number one, aren't
The
you?
motion is this slide on?
Yes, ma'am. Just slide 2.
I'll just make a comment if you don't mind. I'm not going to support that because I want to be able to have some flexibility to maybe move on some of the personal property. So I'm not going to support that one. And I'll just make a general, a motion for the 85, but I'm not there yet as far as what I've been looking through the budget at. So just to let folks know. But Mr. Yakubowski, as far as yours, I'm not going to be able to support it. I'm sorry. We'll go ahead and vote.
If I can make one comment real quick.
Go ahead.
Mine is just for advertising purposes. I do want to reduce the personal property rates, perhaps to what was recommended or even lower. So my motion is just to give us the flexibility of keeping it high with the ability to lower it later.
Oh, okay. Okay, I thought you were asking for it to be fixed at those rates. Okay, that I can support. All right. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
No.
Mr. Ross?
Hey.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
And chair's aye.
Now we need to advertise a rate for the special districts on slide 3.
Mr.
Skinner, go ahead.
Thank you. Can we do all four at one time, except as presented?
It's up to you,
I
whether
like-
you want to do all four or do one at a time.
I will, since I'm looking at my district, I would like to make them all, but if there's any objection, I would only make Massaponax, Lee Hill East, and Lee Hill West as my motion, but it's okay, then okay. My motion would then be accept as advertised, recommended by the county for the 2018 recommended rate for the SSDs.
All right, motion by Mr. Skinner to keep the SSDs at the recommended rates, Massaponax, Lees Hill East, and Lees Hill West.
And Harrison Crossing included in that. It's okay.
To all four?
Yes, sir, all four.
Okay. All right, advertised rates as listed in the highlighted for 2018 rates, if that's, you got that, Amy? All right, I mutilated that one, sorry, folks. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
And chair's aye. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess I do need to, we should have done this at the beginning, Mr. Marshall. Our favorite parts of this ceremony are little statements that we have to read. You want to go first, or you want me?
I can go first.
Go ahead, Mr. Marshall.
The disclosure statement that we're required to read, I hereby disclose I have an interest in the budget transaction as an employee of the county. My disclosure is on file with the clerk and is available to the public for review. Mark, Amy, please record this disclosure in the minutes of this meeting as required by law.
All right, my turn. I hereby disclose I have an interest in the budget transaction as a retired employee of the county. My disclosure is on file with the clerk and is available to the public for review. Mark and Amy, in this case, Mr. Cole and Amy, please record this disclosure in the minutes of this meeting as required by law. All right, now we have a presentation, and I will give you all the floor.
We do. Now we're going into the CIP discussion portion of the work session. And Mr. Ben Loveday is here to help us understand the public sector construction and market conditions and why we're seeing some increases in project costs.
Yeah, we wanted to give you a quick briefing on what the conditions are in the public sector that are being seen across the country and in Virginia. According to Downey and Scott, that's a major cost estimation firm. It's one of the ones that we use for our projects. They've shown that there's been about a 15 to 20% increase in public sector construction costs over the last 18 months. Their primary contributing factors have been labor shortages, both unskilled and skilled, an excess of public project volume. Basically, a lot of those projects were sitting on shelves ready to go, and then now they're all kind of hitting the market at one point. That leads to selective bidding and higher margins because there's less competition versus the number of projects, and also just a general increase in material pricing. Another more concerning aspect of that is based on multiple indexes, there is a projected construction inflation index of about 5% annually for the next 2 to 3 years. So basically it boils down to that unless we see a downturn in the economy or a downturn in the construction field, we would expect project costs to go about 5% each year over the next 3 years. So that's about 15% over that period if things fall on the track they're at.
This next slide is a summary of the 5-year CIP plan just by category. And I won't go through each of the numbers there, but you can see the 5-year total for general government projects is $113.1 million, transportation's at 36.9, schools at 85.2, and utilities at 140.4, for a total 5-year CIP of $375.6 million. Mr. Taylor asked that I not go through each individual project, but that I have the category information here and then highlight the new projects. And so for each category, this one happens to be the general government category. For each category, where you see a red font, not the check marks, but the actual project, that is a new project in this CIP. So you've heard about the DSS Health Department office building. There's $9 million over the 5-year period in the CIP for that. And that is really to address the lack of space currently existing in DSS, and also to co-locate the DSS and Health Department functions, which have largely the same citizen usages. Tone paging system is a public safety system, and that is to transition the current tone paging system into more a digital alert system for fire and rescue and the sheriff's office. Cloud strategy implementation. Some of these I'm going to have to check my notes on because I don't recall them as well as others. This project is to establish a cloud solution for the movement of existing county systems into a cloud environment, and to provide a centralized set of tools and applications internally to provide key information to our citizens and the workers who use these citizens every day. The business tax software update is simply an update of our existing system. That existing system is set to reach the end of its support life cycle and will need to be replaced. The current plan is to replace that in fiscal year 2020. And then lastly on this page, the ArcGIS platform implementation is to strengthen our mapping and analytics platform for GIS. And I should have noted this when I first started. When I get to the end of this, project managers are here in the audience, and if you have specific questions on projects, they can come up and talk. And Mr. McLaughlin has a question now.
Mr. Chair, just so the DSS building, it's been briefed as a significant concern, but it sounds like it's in the CIP over 5 years.
It is our CIP is 5 years. The first year for DSS building is fiscal year 19. We have $1.2 million in fiscal year 19 for this project, followed by $4 million in fiscal year 20 and $3.8 million in fiscal year 2021. So it's really the first 3 years of the 5-year planning period.
So it would be constructed end of 21, maybe 22, would be available occupancy?
Let me see. Yes. Yes.
Okay. And that's kind of my question. Is it a grave concern, like should be renting space today or finishing out the Merchant Square building, or it seems like now we're planning for 3 or 4 more years to build this, so that's my only question. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Skinner?
Along those same lines, do we have the property, when we purchased and we built the judicial building and the public safety building, do we have additional land already over there? Because we purchased quite a little bit of land when we put those up. Do we have that land available for DSS? And is that, or is land included in the CIP?
I don't believe there's enough land there that's outside of the parking lot area to construct, a 30,000 square foot building. There is some land adjacent to the public safety building, but I believe that is slated for like a phase 2, or should they ever need to expand public safety at that point. But I'd have to do a little more research to see exactly where the property lines are around that structure.
I'd like to know that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. Ross?
I have heard about the $2 million additional for the animal shelter. That seems like that would be in red, and it's not. Or should it be in red? Is it a change?
No, what is meant by the red here is an entirely new project to the CIP. It doesn't indicate whether or not the funding has changed.
Okay. So I guess when we're looking at this tonight, what are you looking for from us? Is it just information, or are you asking for a decision on the CIP tonight?
No, I'm not asking for a decision on this tonight. The CIP is set to be adopted at the meeting in April, just prior to the regular budget adoption,
Okay.
so April 10th. Tonight is really just a work session for you to ask questions of the project managers who are here and to help you get better acquainted and more okay with the projects in the CIP.
Is there anyone that can speak to the additional $2 million that's going to be asked for the animal shelter?
I can give you a general briefing on the most current cost estimate we received for the project, which actually was on Friday of last week. Basically, we're seeing about a 30% increase in the overall cost of that project from when we first discussed the overall project scope. We're assuming that, based on what we're seeing in the construction markets, the 15 to 20% of that is probably just market increases, and the remaining 10% is the more you dial into the project in terms of scope, you're getting a better idea what those cost estimations are. I will note that the animal shelter design plans are right now at 95% and are ready to be reviewed by the building department. The expansion itself cost estimate came back about $4.4 million, and then the renovation, we did see an increase in the cost of the renovation just based on the scope of that renovation project, and the idea that you would want to make sure you at least have it pre-designed to maximize that existing space versus the new space. That renovation was about $1.2 million, and then there was about $350,000 in just miscellaneous costs, security measures, and generalized testing and engineering services. So it brought the total cost right now about $5.95 million.
So if I remember right, originally it was $3.1 million, I believe, and then about a year ago, the board voted to add another collectively. The majority of the board added another $1 million to it. Now there's $2 more million that's being requested to be added to it. So that seems like you start at 3.1 and now we're at 5.9. It seems more than 30%.
Basically, what we were looking at was about a $3.5 million budget originally.
Okay.
And that was 3.5 to 3.7. That included design, and that was the budget we originally looked at. And then we looked at options. I believe it was around a 8,000 square foot addition. And then we came back to the Board of Supervisors and talked about, the Sheriff's Office talked about the need to go to an 11,000 square foot addition, which was recommended to move forward with. That additional $1 million funding was associated with basically increasing from an 8,000 square foot expansion to 11,000 square foot expansion. What we're seeing now is, with the 5.9, is a combination of market conditions and just dialing in the scope more where the project's at.
Have we started that project? I mean, how much money have we spent on the project so far?
I would have to go and see what the total engineering services on it, the contract to date is. Basically, we're at 95% design plan, so we're ready to put this thing, once it's finally designed, or final reviewed in the building department, out to bid, and the plan was to have that out to bid early summer. We are actually bidding the project with the expansion, as the primary objective. We want to have that expansion in place. They need more space. The renovation, we're actually bidding as they would call a bid alternate, so that when we go on bid day to open the bids, I'll see a price for the expansion. I'll also see a price for the renovation. That does two things. If market conditions are great and that project falls within budget, then we have options. It also gives us more options in terms of evaluating that project cost if it's over the desired budget of the project. I will note that some of the renovation features in that project are mandatory to meet some state guidelines, but it's not the totality of what the renovations proposed are.
And then I did want to ask about the Marshall Center, because I appreciate the information that you've given to me, and I've shared it with the entire board. Are you asking for more money for renovation in the Marshall? I know it's an existing project. Are you asking this year for more money for renovation than you originally were?
No, I think right now the Marshall Center is showing about Marshall Center is going to be 5.5 in 2023. I don't believe that number is being changed at this point. I think where we're at is, as was expressed to you earlier, about the boilers being in the building, the fact that when those boilers reach the end of their lifespan, that kind of reaches the point to where you're deciding how you're going to provide heating and air conditioning for that building for the next 20 to 30 years. So, we're saying about in the next 5 years, those boilers will be 20 years old, 25 years old. So that's the time frame that we need to look at, what we're going to do to provide HVAC services in the building. And at that point, do you open up all the walls to do a full mechanical, electrical, plumbing renovation, or do you do other options? Like I said, that's just kind of where.
So I would just ask my fellow board members to consider even when we're looking at the social services building to be built out over 3 years, maybe we're going to need some extra space from what's in the Marshall Center if the Marshall Center is going to take a $10 million renovation in 2021. It's just something we should think about. Thank you.
Mr. Skinner?
Couple questions. When you're talking about 15 to 20% increase, that's what we're seeing, and your 5% increase, I would think that like Northern Virginia's costs are much more expensive than what we have down here. Where do you get your information from? Where do you come up and say, well, we're seeing an increase? Exactly how do you see it? Where do you find it? So we understand where this, because I'm telling you, I think in the history here, even our own engineers sometimes overestimate the value, a little bit conservative, and when it comes in, we're finding that it's been lower than what we estimated. So,
we go on the information that's most readily available to us. We are currently working with engineering firms and with Downey & Scott. Downey & Scott is a major municipal supplier of cost estimations. They've done the work for the Fredericksburg building that was referenced in the paper not too long ago. They've done the public safety building. We did the public safety building. So they have basically a thumb on the market and kind of understand what's going on. And that's where we're getting the 15 to 20%. They're looking at overall market conditions in the region and saying, don't be shocked when you bid a project and it comes in 20% over budget, because this is what we're seeing. And in terms of comparing Spotsylvania's construction market to Northern Virginia, basically it's close enough to where the construction market's being drawn across the board. So, contractors that were, working in Spotsylvania are going up there and competing for jobs, and, vice versa. So, we've even seen some jobs that are more difficult that municipalities haven't even received bids on, because it is at the point in the market right now that's kind of a contractor's world in terms of a bidding.
what about even thinking about when you build something, go out and say, hey, we've got this amount of money, what can you give us for it, rather than going out for a regular RFP
There are options and procurement methods where you can do basically what they call a lump sum design build, and where you could say you have, you say you have $10 million and you want to build, an office building. You're basically at that point turning it over to the contractor to kind of, you're giving them very, very minimal information to go on. You're basically saying, office building, animal shelter for this X number of dollars. They'll come back and say, how many square feet that's going to be, or, the materials that are in the building, the features that are in the building itself. So there is a procurement method where you can do that, but you lose some of the control in terms of stakeholder input and overall where that final product will go and what it will look like.
So we can go out with let's say a scope of what we expect, and then go out and let them bid on that. Or just, say, hey, this is what we expect, this is what we've got, what can you give us? I'd rather not say, well, leave it in their hands, but we need to know what we're going to get for the money.
We have not done that before. We've looked at it, and actually the procurement manager has been looking at changes to our procurement policy that lets us do that. And we actually have several projects in the utilities department which we're looking at that as an option for design build. That's something that we could go back and talk to procurement on a couple of these projects. That I would note that, like the animal shelter, for instance, you've already expended those design funds, and that's ready to be put out for bidding. So if you do a lump sum design build, you may just be not throwing away. Basically, that engineering plan may not even be used.
We can be flexible, but we certainly got to think of the future, what we can do and how we can put those out, those contracts and stuff of that nature. I agree. We've put a lot of money so far, so we don't want to waste that for the animal shelter. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Marshall.
I had a question or two on the animal shelter. When I went through the budget, I seen that the animal shelter said a scope of work was at $1 million for additional scope of work. Then we have the $2 million cost increase. Just for clarification, the total cost increase that's being asked for this project is $2 million, or are we asking for 3 million here with the two different numbers?
The total increase that we had in the CIP is $3.2 million, although based on the cost estimates you got on Friday, that may be $2.2 million that we actually need.
What does that include? But that may have included the 1 million that was never allocated.
Because I'm going through the numbers that I've seen on the budget, and I'm going through the numbers that have been given here today, and it's basic adding and subtraction, and they're not adding up with the total number that I'm getting on this piece of paper right here.
I'm super good at adding and subtracting, so what's in the CIP as recommended is an additional $3.2 million.
Okay.
We just heard that we may need to coordinate and see if that figure needs to be revised based on estimates he got on Friday.
Okay.
I think hold on just one second. I think the $1 million that you're referring to, there is a chart in the document where we are trying to tie back to the board's priorities. And at the time, the board thought it was an additional $1 million scope of work.
Okay.
Since then, it has come to this. And so, yes, your original direction was add in the additional 1 million. Now that number is something different.
We're looking at a total increase of $3.2 million is what we have on the books in front of you now.
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
That's the number I was looking for. That's the number I was looking for. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Also on the Marshall Center that was brought up, I've had discussion with county staff in the past couple of months about renovating the bathrooms upstairs at the Marshall Center that our county employees are using. I've been given a quote. Last time said we may be able to find funding to do that project with the current budget that we are currently in. Can you give me any insight on if that's being done? Because I don't have any of that. I don't see any of it included in the budget.
That project, we were actually working with county administration to really define a scope of the project. Once again, going in and just doing an aesthetic makeup, which we can do. We can replace the partitions. A lot of the fixtures have already been replaced. We can, paint the tile. We can do things to try to make it more aesthetically pleasing. But, the concern is we want to make sure that whatever we do inside of those bathroom facilities, we aren't ripping out in a year or 6 months or 18 months because the cast iron pipes have corroded to the point to where, they have broken free and you're having, sewage running down inside the building, or that, the galvanized pipes are broken and you got a water leak. So I think that's kind of where we're at, a little bit of a conundrum on that project is, really trying to figure out, what we can do to make the facility nicer, but not end up, throwing money away if we have the actual plumbing itself fell within, a period of time or something like that. So I think that's kind of where we're still working on the overall scope.
Yeah, appreciate it.
And I'll just ask one quick question. What is the total, so I have an understanding of, what is the total cost for the animal shelter right now? Because this has been before us. I think this is like the third or fourth time at least.
Based on the recommended capital improvement plan that Monty pulled together based on the numbers that we had originally, on a couple of those cost estimates, it's around $7 million. But to believe that number, can be adjusted based on those most recent cost estimations we received.
Wow. I'll just reserve any other comment. I guess as far as the Marshall Center, what I've calculated up so far is almost $10 million using the sheets that we got handed, where you have the major maintenance for the HVAC and electric, major maintenance renovation, and then you even got one for the auditorium upgrades. And that does not even include the bathroom suggestions. So we're at about $10 million to do anything with that building to make it, I guess, just simply usable, not even counting any construction to change it where we could actually use it or be a viable location for social services. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I don't, Kevin Brooks, Parks and Recreation, kind of handles some of the auditorium renovations and can speak to those. But yes, I mean, generally the building itself, just to come in and basically replace the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, this is without any engineering documents or engineering studies. I mean, we're guessing between $5 and $10 million, to basically rework the building to the point that it's basically in its current condition, but at least you have, functioning electrical boxes and panels that you can get parts for. You have plumbing that's going to actually function and, you know, reduce the limit of breaking. You have insulation potentially on the outside walls. There are options we can look at on that project. Right now, we're trying to get costs for just replacing the boilers as is. We haven't got those costs in yet. We're actually trying to get those last week and looking at converting those to propane, which is actually a cheaper, more efficient way of running them. So, I mean, there is a lot of variations, a lot of multitudes of projects that could be completed with that building, but they all are not cheap. I mean, it's
Right.
a building built in 1939, 1940, and
I don't see any cost in here, I mean, like, say, for the redesign or making it conducive for actual social services or anything else. You're just making it,
Yeah, it's not reconfiguring the building to turn it into more efficient office space or anything like that. We're just talking about
well, that's what kind
basically
of, that's just what I'm
modernizing.
getting at.
basically it's just the bones. The what you're seeing right now are in terms of what's in the budget and some of the earlier emails. I mean, that's looking at replacement of the bones of the building in terms of, you know, the infrastructure in it. But yeah, you're not really looking at creating a large number of offices in there, anything like that, because something the key to remember is when you walk down the hall in the building, the way that building is constructed, the actual exterior walls of the hall are load-bearing. So it really, you know, anything you could do gets expensive quick when you're trying to talk about removing load-bearing walls in that facility.
Apologize. I guess next with social services, do we have a number anywhere that shows the space needs that are going to be needed for social services anywhere? And I guess also, since the Marshall Center has been brought up for the possible use of social services, I know this is short notice, but is there any way we can put together something within the next month where we have an idea if that's even feasible?
We have a 2013 space needs study. I would just encourage that we perhaps might want to look at updating that based on what Gale's current demands or, you know, basically facility demand is, to make sure that is still in line and still a valid estimation.
Well, that's just something that we need, I mean, basically ASAP, if we're going to make any decisions on a new building or trying to rent a commercial facility, if there's such one event.
Well, if I may just
Yes, Mr.
interject,
Hall.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that, you know, we did look at a kind of a renovation of the Marshall Center, and whenever you go into an older building, gets very expensive to try to basically convert it into a modern office space. And my understanding, and Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, that it was actually on a square foot basis, it would have been cheaper to build a new building than it would be to try to renovate and modernize the Marshall Center.
That's correct, Mr. Cole. And Mr. Benton, we are planning to come back on the 27th.
Okay.
And we'll have all that information for you. But based upon the space needs study, and this is for social services and the health department, space needs combined, the need in 2017 was 28,438 square foot. And at that time, there's about a 4,300 square foot deficit. And that was in 2017.
I know I'm probably pushing you in memory, but
I'll have all the breakdown of the square footage for you on the 27th.
could you also possibly just, I know I'm adding more work to you, could you possibly take a look at what's out there available for either rent or lease and see if there's anything, because I know it's been mentioned a few times about possibly renting or leasing a facility. And
I can certainly do that, but please be reminded, though, that if we do rent an outside facility like that, we'll still have to do interior renovation.
oh, I'm probably extensive. Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. Just a comment. About a year or so ago, we had talked about the courthouse area and the available space. Mr. Taylor did a presentation, and before that, Mr. Vakos was in here and did a presentation on what he was proposing to do and how that sort of gelled with what the county was going to be doing. So I think that that might be something that we would like to take up at our retreat, perhaps, and endorse some type of direction that we take of what we need to do and what is needed. And then that way we'll actually know where we're going. So the other question that I had too was our fiscal guidelines. I was looking in here about paying cash for long-term items. I know that we don't do that. We spread it out. So if it's a school, let's say we spend it over a certain amount of time, we don't pay cash because taxpayers that use it over that amount of time should be paying their portion of it, is the fiscal guideline. So I just want to make sure. When it comes to the animal shelter, I'm very disappointed that we're down this road now, sort of stuck where if we don't do anything, we've wasted money. If we do something, it's going to be even more money. The vote that I had cast to support the renovation portion for another $1 million was to get even more life out of the building, bringing it, I think it was a roughly 12 to 15 year up to about a 20-year use of the building. Now to find out that it's going to be another 15 to 20% is disappointing, and I'll tell you, I think that this, I would like to find a way out of this, because honestly, I think this has become a mess. I don't think that it is going to be, I don't think it's, I'm just disappointed, let me put it that way. And it's one of those things where I would much rather have started from scratch somewhere else and said, here is something, because we're also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the footprint that we have of this building cannot be expanded because we have other stuff that's there. So if we needed in 20 years to double the size of it, there's nowhere to go. And so we have now spent all of this money for a building that, you know, only has a certain amount of life, and then we have to move somewhere else. So I much rather would have spent that money going somewhere else and put in extra money so that we can get an even longer lifespan out of it than doing what we're doing now. To Mr. Skinner's point of bidding, you know, I've never understood why we go out for a bid and now we can include that, well, it could be 15, 20% higher. I will almost guarantee that the bids that come in are just about those numbers. And you know, in the private sector, you never do that. You never tip your hand as to how much money you're willing to spend. You don't go into a car dealer and say, you know, I only have $20,000. You know, you try to get more out of it, and I would like to find a way that we can get more, that we're in a better position when we do these things, because, you know, we tell the public and those bidding how much we have in our bank account and how much we're willing to spend, and surprise, the bids come back at those numbers. So, you know, it seems like there needs to be a better way. I don't know if we can do anything about it at our level, or if it's a state, or if there is a fix, I'm not sure. But it just has always been very frustrating that, that we go down that path. And we seem to, you know, spend the money. Schools are another thing, you know, looking in the book here, new high schools, you know, estimated at $100 million. I mean, that's just maybe what it costs, sure, but that is an amazing number. Riverbend was built for 60, 70 million, I do believe. I mean, that's been a while. That was our last high school built. But it's just we need to find a way to get a handle on it, because if we're going to be building buildings, we're going to be refurbishing, we're going to be doing these things, we need to be spending our money as wisely as possible. And if there's any way for us to, I don't remember what you called it, like a lump bid or something like that. I always said like a blind bid. You put out the specs of what you're looking for, and somebody comes back and says, I'll do this, this, this. And that's the way the rest of the world works. And I would like to see if we can get to that somehow. But thank you.
Anybody else? I'll just say, I actually agree with you, Mr. Yakubowski. Good comments. The Fire and Rescue Training Center, I thought that was earlier in the years to be done. Now it looks like it's kicked that back to, I guess, 2022, 2023, somewhere in there. Is that?
It is out in 2022, 2023. Would it be okay if we took these in order as we get to them?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry. And before I leave this one slide, I do want to say what the R is in blue to the right of Library and Massaponax area. That R is representative of the fact that we do not, at this moment in time, have referendum authority to borrow any money for that facility. We would have to have a referendum in order to do that project. And so we would be looking at, if we were to move forward with a full-blown library in Massaponax, as opposed to some of the storefront options that are being considered, we would need to do a referendum for that probably in November of 2020, based on the current schedule of the project. So I did want to throw that out there. In terms of solid waste, over the 5-year planning period, we have $14.3 million in projects. There is no red font here because these are all continuing projects. There is no new solid waste project for this CIP. Are there any questions about solid waste projects?
Yeah, I got one. Are we ever going to move to where we're not burying stuff? Are we going to get to a point where we can, instead of using all 600 acres or whatever it is out there to bury stuff, we can actually do it a little bit better?
That's certainly the $1 million question. There's a lot of folks out there, they can solve that problem. They will not have to worry about their money for the rest of their life. I think that right now there is no golden ticket on the horizon for not landfilling waste, unfortunately. There are potential alternative disposal methods, alternative energy programs out there, but we haven't really seen them taking hold or really becoming really financially viable. But we're always open to that, and we're always trying to stay on top of industry statistics and trends. And if it ever comes up, we certainly will be the first ones to bring it to the board.
All right. It just concerns me how much, well, not only what we're burying from our own residents, but what we're taking in from everybody else. And maybe the lack of recycling too, or mandatory recycling. I mean, the more we, like I say, I hate to see that land a garbage, basically it's a garbage pit, and that I don't know that we'll ever be able to use again. So just I'd like to see aggressive, forward-thinking, innovative ideas coming to how we can get away from what we're doing now.
The county solid waste management plan is actually up for renewal in 2020, I believe. Perhaps maybe as we approach that timeline, we kind of take a heavy look at that solid waste management plan, which talks about current waste management practices and future waste management practices, and see if we can find something in there that helps get us in the right direction.
All right. It's just every time I go back there, there's another mound started or another area being cleared to, and it used to be where I wouldn't see, it'd be a couple years before another mound was started or something. I can remember going back there as a kid, and there were no mound. There was a hole, and you dumped whatever you wanted in the hole. Not best practice, of course, but like I say, I appreciate what you do there.
Mr. Benton, if I may?
Sure.
We have looked at least 3 or 4 cutting-edge technologies where companies have come in and asked us to look at financial models for partnering for new technologies, but we have not been able to find a partnership yet that was financially viable for the county.
Okay.
So they are out there. There are some things that are being developed, but it's slow. and we haven't seen a model yet that would be beneficial to the county, as well as whoever we're going to partner with.
Okay. Appreciate it.
Okay, over the 5-year planning period, Parks and Rec projects total $3.1 million. All those in black font here have been in the CIP previously. And then for fiscal year 19 through 2023, we have 2 new projects, and those are the Loriella Park Lighting Replacement Project, Phase 1 of that project. That is actually scheduled to be funded with concession revenues. And the last item is basketball court repairs and resurfacing, which is basically just major maintenance of existing amenities. Are there any questions on Parks and Rec projects?
I'll be the bad guy again. The Belmont Passive Park, I think I've heard this before, but I don't know that I got a whole lot of detail from it. Is there a way?
I'm going to ask the Parks and Rec folks to come up and talk about their projects, please.
How you doing, Ms. Brooks?
Hi.
Can you explain a passive park to me?
Basically, a passive park is going to be one that doesn't have athletic fields. The terrain there just doesn't make it usable for building athletic fields or cost effective. So it'll be trails, picnic shelters, parking area, just items that won't take up a lot of flat space. So.
Is that it? I mean, okay. So no ball fields, no
Not at this point.
basketball court, no.
That would be a possibility, yes, sir.
All righty. Now, does that go down to the lake?
No, sir.
Does not.
No, it's a 20-acre lot. It does not attach to the lake.
Well, thought it did. Thank you. Mr. Marshall.
One quick question about the Belmont Park. What's the total cost of that if you happen to have it? I know I've seen it's 50-some thousand this year.
It's 40,000 that's in for 20, and then it's 380 for the next year.
We're looking at a total cost of
$420,000
for a picnic shelter.
Parking, additional amenities, yes, sir.
Okay.
I don't know.
Looks like we could build a ball field or two for $420,000.
Unfortunately, not on the terrain that's there. It's very hilly. So.
I've seen it. I don't know, maybe I'll have a couple of town halls on that one and see if it's even viable to do that, because there's all that farmland out there and the larger properties. I think people, for the most part, have places to walk and go. So maybe we'll have that for discussion later. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Fire and rescue projects over the planning period total $29.4 million. They include the projects here on the slide. The last 2 are new IV pumps for ambulances, and that's really, as I understand it, to help be able to administer the dosages maybe a little easier, since it's kind of a bumpy ride there. And then a retrofit of the 2015 ambulances with liquid springs, which help smooth out the ride on the ambulances. Mr. Benton, you had a question about the Fire Training and Logistics Center.
I did. I thought it was, at one point, within the last 2 years, I thought that was up closer to this year, next year, instead of out so far. Was that moved, or?
Yes, I think this was one of the projects that was moved out, and obviously with limited funding, there are times when we do have to shift projects around. Also, when there are multiple construction projects planned within any certain period, physically, we don't have the manpower to do all of those at one time. And so I think this was a consequence of those 2 items, the funding and the resources to get the project done, and it was shifted out.
Okay. All right, thank you. I guess as far as Company 12, I guess depending on what we do this year with personnel, we might be able to move that one or switch 12 and 3, so for replacement. or the replacement of 3 and the new Station 12. Just to let you know.
Mr. Chairman, too, if, on the presentation we have here, there's company 3 listed as Belmont. That's Partlow
Yeah,
Station.
it's Partlow.
I'm sorry, that's my fault.
That's
my
fine. I just
fault.
didn't want to tear down a new building.
Thank you, thank you. It even says Partlow in the book, and I put Belmont, so, sorry.
Hey, Belmont's nice. Any other questions?
All right. Next up is transportation. And I have one slide of projects, and then I have a graph that I want to talk to you about too. So if you can hold your questions until after the graph, that'd be helpful. So $36.9 million for transportation projects over the 5-year planning period. Of course, it is our continued obligation to projects at 118 and 126. And when I say obligation, I say that because we have obligated through the revenue sharing program with the state a certain share of the costs there. So our shares are planned for in the CIP. We also have two other revenue sharing projects that we applied for this year. And those are the next 2 items on the slide in red. Route 3 operational improvements, also known as bump outs, where the right-hand turn lanes would be made to be turn lanes as well as through lanes, and then the roundabout at Old Plank and Andorra. The next 2 projects, widening of Harrison from Old Plank to Gordon, is a continuing project, as is the implementation of findings from the corridor studies. It's my understanding that those studies are to be complete sometime this spring, and then we will have a better understanding of what the implementation of the findings will be going forward. In this CIP, we have a placeholder of about $6 million each for the Route 1 and Route 208 corridor study implementation, and $6 million for the Route 2, Route 17 corridor study implementation. And I should note, for your benefit and for those at home, any of the numbers that you see for transportation in the CIP are the county's share of those project costs. It does not include the state share of the project costs, and because their numbers are on their books, we don't reflect them in ours unless it's a project that they are going to pay us to do. And none of these projects are that. These are projects that we would be funding for VDOT to do. The last 3 items on the slide are new this year. It's Bloomsbury project to bring subdivision roads to VDOT standards. I should note that I mistakenly called this a rural addition project in the CIP. That has been corrected on the online versions of the document, but I did want to publicly state this is not a rural addition project. That's a separate program. There is planned in this CIP in fiscal year 19 $1 million for a right turn lane at Lansdowne onto Route 2 and $65,000 for a revitalization study of the Route 1 area. And before you ask questions, I did want to show you this slide. Mr. Taylor mentioned out-year transportation funding and obligations in his budget presentation last Tuesday, and I wanted to show you this graph so you could understand what the projects as they are in the CIP really mean for our transfer from the general fund to the transportation fund to meet our debt service obligations are. In fiscal year 19, we are continuing with the $700,000 transfer from the general fund to the transportation fund that was started 2 fiscal years ago. And in addition to that, for fiscal year 19, we are using in the budget about $700,000 in accumulated set-aside funds from prior years to fund the fiscal year 19 transportation fund. That $700,000 in accumulated set-asides is a one-time item. It's available in the transportation fund balance. We're using it one time. You see here from this slide, though, that we have an ongoing need for transportation funding based on our subsidies that we pay to VRE and PRTC, and a big driving force behind what is our transportation fund obligation are the projects that we've already issued bonds for and the projects that are upcoming in this CIP. That means the projects as they are recommended in the CIP means that in fiscal year 20, instead of the $700,000 transfer that we have in fiscal year 19, we will need $1.8 million. In 2021, we will need another $1 million on top of that 1.8, or $2.8 million. In 2023, we will need 3.3 million, and in 2023, we will need 3.8 million. And that is funding that otherwise would be in the general fund to support general fund needs, but that we will need to transfer to transportation to balance the transportation fund based on these projects. So with that, I will take any questions that you have on transportation projects.
Mr. Kenner?
Well, I think one of the things that's probably positive here is when you transfer, obviously it depends what the assembly does with the floor tax on the VRE, because I think that what I understand, what I've been briefed on, Mark, if you want to correct me, but they're looking at a possibility of where they will start where the gas is as of this year, and as it goes up, it will be increased to that price until it hits the original bottom of $3.25, something like that, $3.40 or something, as it goes up. And go ahead if you have a comment.
What has currently passed the House, and I don't know if it's passed the Senate yet, but just setting a floor at the current price so that it can't go down. It does not have any automatic bump up. You know, if the bump up would have to, I think, be new legislation. I believe that's the way it currently is. The Senate may have the version you're talking about. I'm not sure.
Okay, because that's what we briefed at a possibility at the PRTC, and I think also at VRE meeting, that's what it looked like, because originally we asked for it to go to the original $3.25, $3.40 for the floor tax, and that was probably not going to happen, but they said what they'd like to do is current price when it's approved, and then as it steadily goes up, then they would keep that as a floor tax until it reaches the current floor tax that the Assembly approved in 2013. Okay, so that's just something to look at. I mean, before we've been stuck with, as the gas goes down, less tax we get, and it's starting to hurt not only us, but we're fortunate because we get an awful lot of traffic on 95. Our location, we get a lot of people coming north that do not want to stop. Manassas, you know, they've got a lot of problems with that, keeping up with it. So the other question I have is Bloomsbury project to bring a subdivision roads to VDOT standards. Well, usually in subdivisions, the developer maintains those roads, and then did we accept these roads or something? And when we accepted those roads, I see Doug standing up here, did we know of the standards? And well, again, were we briefed that these were substandard roads when we accepted them from the developer and then to turn them over to VDOT?
These roads are supposed to be turned over to Virginia Department of Transportation. They have not been turned over. What happens when a property gets subdivided, the roads get platted, their deeds are then conveyed to the county. The county has that recorded plat. The developer develops the road, puts the road in place, VDOT accepts the road. Then the developer has an inspection. It gets formally turned over to Virginia Department of Transportation. This portion, these two roads here, never got turned over by the developer. They were built, they were constructed, and they never got turned over. The Bloomsbury is not completely built out, but these roads, these portions of roads, these two cul-de-sacs, historically, we used to have a bond. We would carry a bond on these roads. Those bonds would be renewed every year. And if they didn't get renewed, usually they would get renewed every year, and then we would turn them over to Virginia Department of Transportation. Now, this subdivision, the developer is no longer around. They have walked away. So the roads, the actual areas of right-of-way is recorded to Spotsylvania County. Virginia Department of Transportation hasn't taken over the roads, and it's our obligation to bring those roads to standards.
The developer went, if I'm not mistaken, went under.
Correct.
And walked away.
Well,
It's been long going.
But there is an HOA, is there not, in Bloomsbury? I guess
There
what
i-
I'm
there
saying-
is an
I'm
HOA.
saying that why, I think we need to be careful, because what you're saying is a builder makes his money, then doesn't have enough money, he walks away from it, throws it over to the county?
We
as
hold,
far as
we hold a bond
respons-
now that's called an evergreen bond.
And
It's
do-
self-renewing,
does-
and it doesn't expire.
Do we have, on the bond, do we have money to pay for this?
No, we do not.
We do
Not
not.
on
So
this.
how much is this going to cost us, by the way?
$600,000.
I
1982.
I guess
when
what I
it was
really don't
developed-
understand is why is it our responsibility to take over a developer's land?
Okay, so when a developer comes in and they subdivide a property, they subdivide the property and they give the road, where the road is supposed to be in place, it is dedicated to right-of-way, hereby granted to Spotsylvania County for the improvements. The improvements are then the developer's responsibility. The county is in agreements with that. We have a plat. It's signed by Virginia Department of Transportation. It's signed by us. They give us a surety for it, and they go to construct the road. Those areas within that right-of-way, it's not private, it is hereby granted to Spotsylvania County. It is to be turned over to Virginia Department of Transportation. When the developer is done, he walks away and turns those roads over to Virginia Department of Transportation. These two cul-de-sacs never got turned over to Virginia Department of Transportation. 1982 turns into 1992. The residents there, they live there. It was not brought to anyone's attention until all of a sudden, I believe it was 2015, and they did resurfacing in Bloomsbury. And they didn't resurface these two roads because they weren't turned over to the state system. It was brought to our attention. We agreed to have those areas of road turned over to Virginia Department of Transportation.
I'd like to visit that at a later time. Or, I mean, it just seems like
Yeah.
we sort of got stuck for $600,000.
We absolutely did. Normally, we have a bond. All of our other subdivisions, we have a bond. Again, this one was in 1982, and he walked away. He went bankrupt. Granted, there was the front portion of it. The bond was, I was able to get the bond. The same developer did Saw Hill. I managed to work with the bank and get the money from the bank, and actually worked as the contractor to get the roads and the remaining portion of Saw Hill done. We didn't have an evergreen clause in those bonds. We were thankful enough that that developer who walked away and unfortunately went under, we were able to get the money from him. Again, that doesn't happen today. We keep that money doesn't expire. That money stays in there until we turn it over to Virginia Department of Transportation.
Thank you.
And Mr. Skinner, I did bring that to the county when I first got elected. It was actually brought to Ms. Heidig's attention, but apparently, no disrespect to her, but it didn't go anywhere. Then I asked that the county look into it, and that's when they started finding that the sureties and stuff like that were not done as they are today. Like I said, this dates back to 1982. So there are roads, but not, you know, it's a cluster, to say the least, just to put it plainly.
That's fine.
I think we can move on. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Yakubowski.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Couple of questions. Transportation, that just seems like a lot of money, $600,000 for two cul-de-sacs. I mean, are we estimating high and hoping it won't? And if we have to bring it up to VDOT standards, how much is it just to resurface the roads?
If it was just that simple, yes, it would be a lot less expensive. There are portions of the road that are failing. Granted, the road has been in for 30 years,
right.
28, whatever. There are portions of the road that I have been working diligently with Virginia Department of Transportation to meet the county halfway on it. Virginia Department of Transportation is not in the habit of accepting roads that are not of brand new standard, that don't have a minimum of a 10-year life. So for me to be negotiating with them,
They have worked with us, got cost estimates with us, had their engineers out there. They're going to be lenient on some of the provisions. And is that cost estimate maybe high to risk on error? Yes. It would be much rather to jump into this and know that we have sufficient funds and maybe have some overage that we don't need, rather than to go into it and get halfway done and then be deficient.
And so if we weren't to do it, the county currently owns them anyway.
The county, the area, correct. It
Yeah.
is dedicated, hereby dedicated to Spotsylvania County.
So the county is in ownership of those roads. So what we're trying to do is bring them up to par to turn them over to the state.
That's correct.
So that we don't have that liability for years to come of maintaining.
Correct.
Okay.
And, Mr. Chairman, if I'd like to just emphasize that this is an older project, and these are kind of a legacy situation, and we have, I guess, better procedures nowadays to try to make sure that we don't get into this situation again. Is
That is
correct?
absolutely correct.
Well, and we had this issue when it came to water and drainage and older subdivisions, and we set up the tier program, and we actually had people, if you wanted your drainage issues dealt with, you had to put some money towards it to help fix it. So, you know, I'm not saying that we need to do that, but it just seems like this burden is now on all the taxpayers, and we need to find a way to, I mean, now we know it's not going to happen again, but are there any other places out there, or have we checked all the old subdivisions to make sure that we're not going to run into this again?
In the past 5 years, I've found 23 that I have managed and we have brought into the state system.
Okay.
This is the only one that there were no funds that I could find, that they had all expired and the developer kind of walked away from them. So out of the other ones, just in the immediate area, I was able to get those funds, work with procurement, work with VDOT, and make those funds stretch to finish those projects. Unfortunately, these bonds had expired so many years ago, and the bank no longer held those sureties.
Well, being 22-1 is pretty good, so that's.
I
yeah,
thought it was pretty good.
That's not bad, so, but we're sure that this is not, you said that you found those. I just want to make sure that these things don't keep coming up, and, you know.
Well, it's hard. I mean, granted, I don't
Right.
want them to keep coming up because it is an absolute nightmare.
Right.
But from our records, as soon as I say that, another one's going to, you know, surface or rear its ugly head.
Yeah.
But I believe no, that there aren't.
Yeah, but we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
I mean, you know, we think we've got it settled now, and that we're in good shape going forward, but that doesn't mean that there's not a road from 1974 laying out there somewhere waiting to raise its head, you know. But right now, like he said, these are county roads.
Right.
I mean, they were dedicated to us, you know, and before they were really built to VDOT standards, and the developer has gone defunct, so we're kind of stuck with them.
And the citizens didn't realize. The
Right.
citizens built their homes, they moved into their homes, and these are quite long cul-de-sacs. These two cul-de-sacs go up two different grades, and it's not like a 500-foot cul-de-sac. We're talking close to a mile, I believe, of length on the two cul-de-sacs, half a mile, something like that, 4,200 feet, linear feet, something like that, almost a mile of road. But the residents didn't know that they weren't accepted by VDOT. The county didn't know they weren't accepted by VDOT, and the developer walked away. So we have a better handle on that. We have a better tracking system. We've worked with the county attorney's office to make sure that our subdivision agreements are solid. Bonding doesn't expire now, so we hold that until the project is completed. And now VDOT also holds another bond once it's accepted for another year after it's completed. So there's other steps and other layers that's implemented.
No, I think it's important to explain it because, like Mr. Skinner said, this is the first time it's popped up on here, and just getting that information, I think, is necessary. I had a couple of questions continuing in transportation. The roundabout, the bump outs, even this Bloomsbury, where is that money coming from? Is that cash that we're taking out? Is it VRE money?
Each one of the ones you just named, actually, each of the projects that's listed here is bond funded through the 2014 referendum under the transportation question, and that debt service is being paid for by the fuel tax, and then also by that transfer in fiscal year 19 of $700,000, and the incline that I showed here on the graph in out years. Incline transfer from the general fund.
So we're taking money out of the bond referendum that had specific questions, though I do know that it had the extra question that allowed money to be spent in other projects that are identified later. But just to be clear, that we're using the 2014 bond money on Route 3, Andorra Drive, and Bloomsbury.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. The other question, okay, so the graph that you show with the 700,000 to 1.8 to 2.8 to 3.3 to 3.8, that's a cumulative number. It's not a new number per year. So by 2023, we're going to have to be pulling out 3.8 million out of the general fund. Excuse me, how much money did we have in this year's general fund outside of current obligations, debt, and fiscal policies that we, of new monies that came in? And you, if you have it offhand, that's fine. You said you were super good with numbers, so.
That's right.
Right.
I said I was super good at adding and subtracting.
Oh, okay. Well, if you need to find them later, that's fine. That was going to be one of my questions that I'm asking, because it looks like the VRE revenue that's generated, at least the estimations on that, are pretty flat, and I understand the reasons for that, because you obviously can't predict what gas prices are going to be, but we are yanking out of the general fund millions of dollars to pay for transportation. And this goes back to the discussion we had before of the schools and the amount of money that they are getting of new revenue, or versus the entire pie. And of new revenue is going to be, they might still get a chunk, but it's going to be reduced because we are transferring money out because we have obligations that we're entering into that dedicates this money to something else, and we simply just don't have the money. And so we're spending all of future revenues, not all, I take that back. We're spending a portion of future revenues into a different category. And then when we have the other ongoing operational expenses coming due, we just simply don't have the money for it. And so all of the stuff that we are putting in here, we have to pay for it. And what we're doing by paying for it is pulling it out of the general fund, which was usually and typically set aside for ongoing county expenses and not a state expense, which is transportation projects. So I just say that to make that statement. If you have the number, that would be fantastic.
We did just find the number. It's $8.6 million in new revenue for fiscal year 19, and I do want to point out that of that $8.6 million, $2.5 million is the adjustment that we did to try to get at prior years' surpluses. So I don't expect that in future years we're going to have that, again, $2.5 million jump in revenues.
So we potentially will have around 6-7 million,
Yes.
roughly.
All else being equal,
Right.
yes.
So then out of that 6 million, then you'll have to take an additional 3.8 million. So we're basically projecting that in 5 years, we will have roughly 2.2 million, roughly. I mean, obviously, numbers can adjust, and our housing market could take off again, and we could see what we had in the 2000s. But being conservative about it, we then will have less money that we can allocate to other departments, because it will already be spent?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Seeing no other questions on transportation, I will move on. The school's 5-year CIP is $85.2 million. It includes the typical categories: replacement buses, technology replacements and upgrades, capital maintenance program, and it includes renovation and expansion of Cortland High School. And I sent you the details of the school's CIP that outlines what's in that capital maintenance program, what's in the technology replacements, and how many buses are expected to be purchased. So if you have any questions about that, I think there are some school staff members here that may be able to help us with that.
Any questions?
Okay. And the last category is utilities. Of course, these projects are funded through the utilities rate and fee structure. They are not tax-supported, expenditures. None of the utilities operations or capital projects are tax-supported. And again, the same methodology applies here. If it's in red, it's a new project. There are quite a few ongoing utilities projects totaling $140.4 million over the 5 years. There are a lot of large plant expansions. The Mott's water treatment plant, the Thornburg wastewater treatment plant work, and then the Nye River water treatment plant improvements. I won't go through each of these, but you can see them here on this slide. And then the sewer-related projects are on this slide. And Mr. Marshall, I think you had a question earlier today. We got your questions and haven't had a chance to answer them all. You had a question specific to what is included in the replacement heavy equipment, and that is 2.5-ton heavy-duty crane trucks for about a total of $300,000, and 2.5-ton service trucks for another $200,000. That accounts for the approximately $500,000 budgeted in fiscal year 19.
You said a crane truck. You talking about buying a heavy-duty crane, or you like something to lift motors out of trucks with? Or?
Excuse me. Generally, these trucks are based on an F550 frame with a 3,000 or 4,000 pound crane on it, primarily used for the pump station crews, so that they can pull pumps out of wet wells and lift fire hydrants.
I know what you're talking about now.
Stuff like that.
I wanted to make sure I was on the right page there.
Any other questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, while we're looking at the Nye River water treatment plant improvements, just when's that scheduled to be completed? I see they're working on it, and
They're actually beginning to test the plant's operation now.
Okay.
Actually, today they were doing some additional review of the chemical feeds. So we anticipate that plant to be in operation prior to the seasonal peak we see in the spring. So I'm anticipating that we'll have that plant online, hopefully by the end of March.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right.
In terms of funding of the CIP, that's shown here on this slide. This is for all projects other than utilities projects. The total expenditures over the 5 years are $236.8 million. 163.7 of that is to be financed through bonds. And for the public, bonds are also loans. So that's why you hear us talk about debt service. Debt service is the repayment of those loans used to finance the projects. Transfers from other funds are totaled at $66.9 million. The bulk, the bulk of that each year is the policy level transfer of funding from the from the general fund to the capital projects fund as cash to the CIP. Other sources are $3.7 million. The majority of what is in that row is Fredericksburg's share of various projects, and then use of the fund balance is shown at $2.5 million over the 5 years. So you can see revenues and expenditures do match over the 5-year period. And then on this slide, the $40.4 million in fiscal year 19 is highlighted yellow. That is what we plan to borrow in 2018 for the fiscal year 19 projects. And that $40.4 million is broken out as shown here, with the largest share at $30.8 million for schools projects. And that does include funding for a portion of the Cortland High School renovation and expansion. And then you can see what the other projects there are.
Any questions or concerns on this? Mr. Skinner?
So I see where the recommendation, oh, excuse me, I may have jumped the gun. I'll wait until I don't have it yet.
Okay.
Can we stay within our borrowing limits with all this, I assume?
We have looked at that, yes, and with these projects, we are within our three ratios that we have to maintain for debt, and that's the debt service to expenditure ratio, the payout ratio, and the debt to assessed value. Thank you. We have tended to bump up against the debt service to expenditure ratio. I'm searching for that page here. By fiscal year 2025, our policy says that we will be at or below 10% debt service to expenditure ratio. In 2023, with this plan in place, we're at 10.26%. So we are going to have to work beyond 2023 to decrease our borrowing so that we can meet that fiscal policy of being at or below 10%.
All right. Yeah. How close are we coming?
For 2023, we're at 10.26%, so we are 0.26% away.
Wow. All right.
I will note that that is an improvement. That is definitely an improvement over where we have been in the past. We, in the past, had a range on our debt service to expenditure policy that we could be somewhere between 10 and 12%. We are aiming to reduce that to 10% or below by fiscal year 2025, and there have been years in the past where we were right at that 12%. So we have made some improvements there.
So if the schools come within the next 5 years and say they need a new school.
That's going to be very difficult for us.
All right. Ms. Gaines, I see you out in the thing there. If you please reemphasize to Dr. Baker, because I think he's left, that we're really going to need some idea of y'all's estimates or ideas, guesses, whatever the case may be, of when you might, in the foreseeable future, need a school. I think it's going to be very important to have some sort of idea so we can, and I don't know how plausible, if possible, that is, but the best you can do, please. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Skinner?
Thank you. Sorry, the one question on the very last slide you had, you don't have to bring it up. It was the recommended CIP, and you had the school projects, you have animal shelter, CAD, Exit 118 project, but back on your fiscal 2019 transportation, you have $36.9 million, and in that you've included improvements to Exit 126. Do we have the funding for that already? Is that why that's, can you explain the difference?
Yes, I can explain that. May I please have the floor computer? What is meant by this slide here is the full 5-year period, fiscal year 19 through fiscal year 2023. And so all of these projects are planned to receive some sort of funding during that 5-year period, the total for the 5 years being the $36.9 million at the top. Then what is meant on this slide at the end, excuse me, this is just what we are borrowing for fiscal year 19's projects. So in fiscal year 19, these are the projects that are budgeted in that year.
But what year will you
There's
have?
nothing for 126.
What year will, yeah, I was going to ask you, what year?
126 is in, there's $1 million in 2020, there's $2.4 million in 2022, and this is based on the schedule that we have already in place with VDOT for when our share of the revenue sharing is due for the Route 17 widening and bridge project.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. So if there are no more questions about this slide, I'm going to move on to the last one. I know that's the one we've all been looking for. So after tonight, next week, we have a budget work session scheduled to talk about budget or any remaining CIP issues that you have. There's also scheduled to be a CBRC presentation to the board as to their findings on this budget and for improvements thereof. March 13th, the school board will join you for a joint work session on the budget that night. And then in March 27th, there will be another budget and CIP work session. On March 29th at 6:30? March 29th at 6:30 at Massaponax High School this year, there will be a public hearing on the budget, CIP, and the tax rates. April 5th is the earliest date this year for legal adoption of the budget, given the public hearing date of March 29th. And on April 10th, we will have another budget work session, and that's the date that we will be looking for your general nod of approval on the CIP. April 12th is the current date on which the budget is scheduled for final approval by the board, and that will also be the date that you set the 2018 tax rates. So if there are no more questions, that is our final slide for the evening.
Any questions? Mr. Skinner?
It's not a question. LaShawn, I'm not going to be available. I will not be in town for the board meeting with the school board. Is there any way that I could I'd like to call in for it, but I'd like to see if there's going to be any handouts that you have, if I could get them by the 9th, I'd appreciate that so I could take it with me and I'll be looking at what you're talking about at the same time. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
All right. I guess we need a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn by Mr. Skinner. All in favor? Aye.